All right, hello, welcome back everyone. It's time to cover the Cold War. Very exciting. So World War II is over, and now we enter this really long, weird period in history where everybody was afraid of getting blown up by an atomic bomb. Dang, pretty scary. It was a really scary time period. So I've got my war helmet on because we're ready to go to the Cold War. But actually, it's really not that exciting. Not a whole lot of fighting actually happens. But we'll talk all about it. Guys, my goal with this video is a little bit different. I'm just going to go through a quick notes and question and answer sheet. I know it's the last week of the 9 weeks, and I want to give you guys some extra time to get caught up in missing assignments if you have any for other classes or for my class. I know some of you do have some. So make sure, spend your time wisely this week, and I hopefully won't waste too much of your time with this video. But it is an interesting time period, so let's rock and roll. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I'm going to summarize the Cold War for you very simply, okay? So the Cold War, all it is, it's a very long, intense time period. It's a long time, 1947 to 1991, and it's just this time period when the USA and the Soviet Union are just ready, constantly kind of ready to blow each other up with atomic bombs. Now, I'm kind of like making a joke out of this, but this is legit. They were totally scared of each other, and they did some really crazy stuff as a result. And spent a whole lot of money in a lot of different ways, and it's very interesting time period. It's not that interesting as far as there's not that much stuff that actually happens as far as a war. I know a lot of people that like history like learning about wars. Not too much actual war, but we will talk about the Vietnam War in the next couple of weeks, and that is where you'll get your kind of war history there. And the Vietnam War is super interesting and also really sad. And we'll get to that one probably next week or the week after. Okay, so I'm going to go through the Cold War, and like I said, the basics, all you need to know is it's a long time period between the USA and Soviet Union when they're just kind of ready to blow each other up, but they never do, thankfully. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about why this happens and what happens, okay? So first of all, what you need to know is that after the war, after the USA used the atomic bomb, the Soviet Union said, man, we got to have one of those. And then the United States sees them creating one, and they're like, oh, well, we better make another one because they made one, and we actually don't know how many they're making, so we better make extra, and we better make new and better weapons. Now, the reason why they're wanting to create new and better weapons, the reason why they're mad at each other is because, remember, the Soviet Union, a communist country, the USA, never been a fan of communism, okay? So they're going to be at each other's throats, and remember, both countries are wanting to expand their influence. We've talked about American imperialism. It kind of continues after World War II, or it kind of picks back up, because they form a lot of alliances, and we kind of move military into a lot of different places. And the Soviet Union does the same thing in the Eastern world. They take over a lot of Eastern Europe, and they're expanding their communist influence, while the United States says, hey, we don't want this. So now we're in this time period where each side is trying to outperform the other, both in weaponry, so more atomic bombs, better weapons, and also with economics. So obviously everybody knows money is power, okay? And fortunately, the U.S. definitely outperformed the Soviet Union. Remember, World War II kicked us into kind of a golden age economically because everybody went back to work. Remember, everybody before had bought war bonds, and we're going to talk about how the veterans come home with the GI Bill. So the U.S. is just doing phenomenally economically, okay? So that's going to really help them versus the Soviet Union, who is a communist country. So their citizens are not going to have a lot of purchasing power. Also, the Soviet Union suffered really greatly during World War II, lost a whole lot of men, and men are laborers, and they take care of the country when they come home. So the U.S., by winning World War II, it launches us into this time period where we're the greatest, Soviet Union is the second greatest, and it's a constant competition, okay? Now, let's talk about the difference in ideology. And ideology just means beliefs. So why does this happen? So here's why it happens, is that the Soviet Union, they're a communist dictatorship. Stalin was still in power at the beginning of the Cold War. Remember, he's a very strong and bad leader, okay? So the U.S. is a capitalist democracy, all right? So remember that, again, let me go back. A communist dictatorship, the power is in the hands of the government. All power rests in the hands of the government, all wealth. The U.S. is a little bit the opposite. We're a capitalist democracy, and so that way, our citizens, you and I, we have a lot of economic freedom, meaning we can go and make as much money as we want to, hopefully find a job and make as much money as we want to if we work hard enough. In communism, you're kind of stuck where you are in society, okay? So here's the thing. The Soviet Union is wanting to build an empire, and the US says, no way, you can't spread your communist beliefs. And that's really all it is. It's the US and the Soviet Union. It's a difference in ways of thinking. It's a difference in ways of living. And they're both wanting to be powerful countries, so they're angry at each other, essentially, for a really long period of time. That's all it is. Okay? It's just some drama that lasts for a while. All right, so how does the United States go about counteracting the influence of communism? We're trying to contain the spread of communism. That's a policy of containment, and we'll talk about that concept a lot. Okay? Containment is what it's called. And we're trying to stop the spread of communism, contain it within the Soviet Union. So what does the USA do to fight against this? Well, first of all, we're going to create NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And basically what it is, it's all the countries of the North Atlantic and the United States, so we're talking Western Europe. All right, Western Europe. And these are going to be basically the same people that we fought with in World War II. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a formal alliance on paper where they get together and they meet and they say, hey, if things go down again, we've got a backup plan now. If World War III happens again, we're going to have something, or if it happens at all, we're going to have something as a backup plan because they're trying to avoid, at this point, they don't know if we're going to have World War III. And thankfully, it hasn't happened yet. So all it is, NATO, it's the U.S. forming an alliance. So that way our military is backed up against the Soviet Union, and we're saying, hey, if y'all come at us, Soviet Union, look at all the people on our side. So we're basically creating, alliances like we did, with the United Nations. And so it's kind of a way to avoid another big war, although as we've learned, alliances tend to drag you into war. So it's kind of crazy. Okay? So why do they do this? Why do they want to create a strong alliance like this? Like I said, containment. They don't want communism to spread. And they're saying, hey, look, Soviet Union, you keep trying to grow and flex on everybody. We can flex pretty hard too. Okay? Next thing, they decide to form another alliance called the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, aka SEATO, which is a great acronym. SEATO. So we got NATO and SEATO. And this adds countries from Southeast Asia, there's a lot of them, where the USSR was trying to spread communism. And we're going to talk about Vietnam. We're going to get a whole lot more into this when we go to Vietnam. So I'm not going to tell you too much now. Just know that the United States forms big alliances. Okay? So it's almost like we're preparing for war yet again. And it wasn't a bad idea, because think about all the tension between these two countries with their weapons, okay? So it's a good idea to form these alliances. It makes us look strong. However, as we know, alliances sometimes can lead to more war or more intensity. All right, now let's move up a little bit. Warsaw Pact. This is the Soviet Union's response to NATO and SEATO. These are Soviet alliances right here, okay? And what it does, rather than making alliances, it's kind of the Soviet Union saying, look, you're going to be under our influence, but the reason why we're doing it is because we are worried about NATO, and we need to have a big alliance because we control you, we got to take care of y'all, etc., etc. And what it does, it ties together, unites the countries of Eastern Europe. It makes a strong pact underneath the umbrella of communism, okay? Now, remember that the U.S. at this point has more economic freedom, okay? And its citizens, its government is much more powerful because it has more money than the Soviet Union, all right? So NATO and SEATO are going to be stronger than the Warsaw Pact. And the Soviet Union knows this, so we're going to see how they're going to build an empire or try to build a communist empire with Cuba later. But I'm going to continue on right here. Take a little water break real quick. Going real fast. All right. So hopefully all this is making sense. Hopefully it's all building up, and hopefully you see why it's a tense time period. All right, let's go ahead and move it on up. So containment. As I was saying before, containment... Boom, boom. Containment is just trying to stop the spread of communism, okay? And the U.S. has a few different ways of doing this. So, like I said, we're trying to contain, we're trying to stop the spread of communism, and rather than using the military, they know it could lead to atomic war, so the U.S. is going to have to look at things differently. So we got economic aid, and what that means is that the United States is going to give out a whole lot of money and a whole lot of supplies to a few different people, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. So this is dollar diplomacy. Okay, so you see how these things all connect. Remember, dollar diplomacy was Taft, And so it's just not much has changed in history between earlier time periods and then the Cold War. So we got dollar diplomacy with economic aid, with trying to contain communism. We're going to buy off countries, essentially. Democracy, so this is going to be your moral diplomacy. So remember, you can be a democracy like the wonderful USA, aka the winners of World War II. So this is going to be a big influence on a lot of countries. They're going to say, hey, and also you got to think about all those totalitarian leaders that had existed in Europe prior to World War II and during World War II. Now a lot of countries are really going to be open to this democracy idea. And thirdly, the Peace Corps is created. And the Peace Corps, what their job is the U.S. sends the best of its young, bright minds, young, intelligent people, mainly doctors and people who are good at speaking other languages and foreign negotiations, things like that. The Peace Corps, they send these young people around the world and they help out poor people, essentially, okay? And that it's kind of another form of moral diplomacy as well. All right? So the U.S. is trying to stop the spread of communism through these ways. All right, now, so we get a couple of new words that you need to know and what you need to, it's like basically vocabulary. And all they are, these are plans to stop communism, okay? But remember, we can't engage in full-out war because it could end in atomic explosion. See, it's really simple. All right, so what method did Truman use? So Truman is president, remember, right after World War II. Truman gives money to aid Greece and Turkey's military. So both of these countries were going through civil wars after World War II. And so the U.S. is going to support the democratic side of the Civil War. Because some people said, hey, the old way of life worked for us. That's how we liked it. And then you've got a lot of people that say, hey, we can't be under totalitarian societies anymore. We need to fight that. So civil wars are going to happen in Greece and Turkey after the war. That's pretty common. After a big war, you'll usually get a civil war in some countries. Now, how much, then we get another plan, it's called the Marshall Plan, and you definitely need to remember that. That one is very important. Marshall Plan, all it is, it's very, very, very simple. Marshall Plan equals money. Lots of money to Western Europe. Okay? So, remember, after the war, Europe is broken up. Soviet Union and the Western countries of Europe, they split, and Eastern Europe stays under communist control. Soviet Union says, hey, we did a lot for y'all. We helped defeat the Nazis on this side, which really led to their ultimate downfall. And so we are going to take part of your land. We're reallocating this for us, and you're under communist control. So the Marshall Plan, what it does, it buys off the countries of Western Europe. Not necessarily buys off, but what it does is it gives them a ton of money, $12 billion, aka $100 billion, that's a lot of money, in modern money, to assist the countries of Western Europe after the war. And what that means is that they gave money to rebuild, and they said, hey, we're going to help you pave roads, we're going to help you rebuild schools, we're going to help you rebuild Europe. Because remember, World War II destroyed Europe. It was terrible, okay? And so this helps rebuild Europe, but remember, isn't this kind of a form of dollar diplomacy in that we're saying, hey, look at all this money, don't be a communist, okay? So there you go. So Marshall Plan, dollar diplomacy, lots and lots of money to Western Europe. So these are all plans of containment. You got to remember that word, it's important, okay? Containment. We're trying to stop the spread of communism. Sweet. So we're rocking and rolling. There it is. It moved. All right. Like I said, 4 goals of the Marshall Plan. It's a lot to do with money, but remember, it's a lot to do with this. Number 4. Remember, we're trying to stop the spread of communism. We're rebuilding war-torn areas. We're giving money and investments to start industries there and get businesses going again. Now think about it, there's probably some American businessmen making money behind this. So this is going to benefit everybody. And I'm not saying the Marshall Plan is bad at all. I'm just saying we have to remember that it goes back to this, okay? And it's going to increase trade. So basically going to help Western Europe build economic freedom. When you have economic freedom, you are stronger than the communists, okay? This is all very repetitive. All right, now, the Soviets get kind of angry about all this going on. And so they decide to take over Berlin, which Berlin was divided into East Berlin and West Berlin. Okay, so you got East and West. And so the East is the communist side. Okay, it's controlled by the communists. Remember, Berlin is going to be the heart of World War II because it's the heart of Nazi Germany. So the West is democratic capitalism, basically the American way. Okay, so West Berlin is democratic. All right, let me circle those two things so you see. So the Soviet Union sees all this Marshall Plan stuff going on, all this money going in there, and they say, hey, this is crazy. Like, y'all are starting to give the eastern side ideas. They're going to start wanting their freedom. They're probably going to overthrow us. And so they get nervous. And what the Soviet Union does is they blockaded Berlin. They set up roadblocks and train blocks, and they didn't let anybody in or out. And people started to really suffer because they ran out of food, all right? And so what the U.S. did is dropped in a ton of supplies, 2.3 million tons of supplies, actually. And this is an event known as the Berlin Airlift, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it took place in 1947, 1948-ish. I think it was a time period that they did this. So the Berlin Airlift, what it did is it dropped in supplies to these people, and so that way they were able to survive. And this is looked at as a very heroic event in history on the U.S. side, and it is a good thing. You definitely want to be a humanitarian during times like this, but this also raised a lot of tension with the Soviet Union, because if the U.S. is going to drop in supplies, what else could they drop in? Maybe bombs, okay? So this raises tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. It's a really good thing that the U.S. did, but it kind of escalates the Cold War just a little bit. But remember, the Cold War is a long, long time, so we're playing a long game here, okay? All right, so let's keep on rocking and rolling. All right, now check this out. This is kind of wild. So remember, we've had a couple of what we call in American history, and I'm going to write it in red scares. And what it is it's when our government gets paranoid of the infiltration of communism, okay? So, of course, after the war and during the Cold War, when we're trying to stop the spread of communism, we're going to be very paranoid and fearful of communism infiltrating us, infiltrating the U.S., okay? And there was a guy who led this charge in politics and in society, and his name was Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy. And he starts something called Mccarthyism. Okay? And what it is, it's kind of, historians kind of call it a witch hunt. All right? Now, they use that analogy because it starts small, like with the Salem witch trials, where there might be one witch. But if you recall, like the Salem witch trials, it ends up being something in the realm of 25 to, I don't even remember how many witches they accused, but it went from one person to a lot of people, and a lot of people died. It was terrible, okay? So McCarthyism is going to be the same thing, but, well, they're not actually. Some people, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. So it's a witch hunt for communists, okay? Some people did die, but not nearly as many as in the Salem witch trial. But I don't want to give it all away, okay? So McCarthyism, what it leads to is this guy, Senator Joseph McCarthy, and what he does is he starts investigating people who might be communists. And notice what it says, government employees. And he would really go after people and investigate their whole lives, and a lot of people were definitely not communists. In fact, there were probably very, very few communists. But notice, it leads to the resignations of 12,000 government employees, and 2,000 people got fired during this time period. A lot of these people were fed up with the system, and they said, hey, if you're going to be like this, we're leaving, okay? But a lot of people were legitimately profiled, investigated, and they were not communists, but they got fired anyway. So really crazy time period, this Joseph McCarthy. I highly suggest you look up some YouTube videos about it. Crazy. And this lasts from the late 40s into the 1950s. But finally, people were like, look, this is getting out of hand. And people were calling each other communists, and it went all over society. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it down here. People got really tired of this by 1954. And McCarthy just he stepped out of the scene, and he had accused way too many people without providing proper evidence. So just like kind of the Salem witch trials, people said enough is enough, and it ended. But this kind of same deal. But some people, it really ruined their lives, and a couple of people died as a result. So check this out. So they really went after Hollywood. The government believed that Hollywood was trying to bring in communists because, you know, they can bring in foreign people and they can bring in actors and they can create movies and stories that might secretly promote communism and things like that. So they go after Hollywood, they go after actors, and they create something called a blacklist. And what it is they put these people on the blacklist, or they blacklist someone, and basically it says you can't get a job because you might be a communist. And this is mainly going to be actors and actresses at the time, okay? And it's a whole big scandal. Definitely look it up. Look up Hollywood blacklisting on YouTube, and you're going to find some interesting stuff for communism, for McCarthyism. So crazy time period in history. McCarthy going after people for accusing them of being communists. Just a wild time. Now, the reason why I'm getting kind of stumbled up is because I'm thinking of this next story. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. So who they are a couple. And Julius happens to work at an agency. They either create weapons or aircraft or something like that. And Julius actually is a Soviet spy. It's been pretty well proven that he was a spy. But here's the sad thing. His wife Ethel, they think or they believe that she actually was innocent. And I definitely encourage you to go look this up on YouTube because Ethel most likely was innocent based on the evidence they provided. So Julius gets caught being a Soviet spy. He was providing information to the Soviets about US aircraft or weapons. It doesn't matter. But either way, they are convicted of spying on behalf of the Soviet Union and sentenced to death. And notice, they were executed in 1953. So the U.S. was not playing around with this stuff. If you were believed to be a communist spy, Soviet spy, the U.S. is going after you. And it makes me kind of really sad because if you look it up, there's a lot of evidence that says Ethel really probably didn't know anything about it. Just a crazy time period. The Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg is who they are. Okay? So you can see communism, it affected, the fear of communism in the Cold War really got into people's heads and really affected society. Take a little water break. I think we're doing pretty good on time. Oh yeah, only 20 minutes. That's good. All right, and we're moving right along. So let's go. All right, so it actually does break out into war. It breaks out into the Korean War, and I should have mentioned that one before I mentioned Vietnam at the beginning. But the Korean War is kind of known as the Forgotten War in U.S. history, so it kind of makes sense that I did that. Apologies to anyone who's offended that I forgot the Korean War. So here we go. The Korean War, it began when the Soviet Union, they backed North Korea and said, hey, we support these guys. North Korea wanted to be communists. North Korea wanted to have a dictatorship, and they still pretty much continue on that path. The army of the Soviet Union crossed the 38th parallel. So North Korea and South Korea had split up over communism. And so when the Soviet army crosses over the 38th parallel, aka their border, the U.S. says, hey, we got to send in troops because that's technically an invasion, all right? So here's what happens. It's the U.S. and the United Nations, aka basically our friends from World War II. They start a war with the Soviets and the North Koreans, okay? So here's the thing. We got something brand new that you need to know, and you need to remember this. This is very important. It's called the Domino Theory, and this is what the U.S. is trying to prevent. And it's where if one country falls to communism, if one country becomes communist, and that's what the U.S. is worried about North Korea, is that, hey, if the Soviets can control it, then that's the spread of communism. And remember, we are trying to contain the spread, okay? So if one country falls to communism, the others will fall because dominoes, the others around it will fall. You know, dominoes fall down like pop, 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 okay? So if one country falls to communism, the rest could fall too that are around it. So the U.S. goes to war with the Soviet Union, not technically, you know, it's just kind of they're there, yeah, you know, we're not going to nuke each other. That's basically what the thing is, okay? Everybody's really worried about it at this point because you got to think, World War II is fresh in everyone's minds. This happens in 1950, okay? So we're only 5 years out of World War II. We know we've all got these good weapons, so everybody's worried, and this is a sad war, okay? A lot of suffering in this war. So the one major battle that you need to know is called the Battle of Inchon, and it's a major victory for the UN and South Korea, who are our allies. and they recaptured the city of Seoul. So then, but here's the problem. This is a very good thing that the U.S. wins this because it's progress against the North Koreans. But here's the problem. The Communist Army of China was communist at the time, and they still have kind of a communist ideology. They're shifting away from that, though. The Communist Army of China looks at this and they say, uh-oh, our friends, our communist friends are falling, they're getting defeated, we better step in. And so things really kind of get back going again. So China enters the war in large numbers, and the U.S. has to kind of back away. We kind of had to retreat to the 38th parallel, and what we have was a stalemate, okay? And actually, to this day, it's still kind of a stalemate. Along the 38th parallel, there are still North Korean troops stationed, and on the other side, directly across from them, are American and South Korean troops. So it's still a tense situation. The war is technically over. However, they never signed a truce. They signed a ceasefire, armistice type deal. Like, hey, we're going to stop fighting just because we see that this is not going to go anywhere. We want to avoid a World War I situation, and we're kind of not wanting to blow up the whole world just yet. Okay? So the North Koreans, they stay on their side, and they are communist, as they stay to this day, and the South Koreans are on the other side, where we have heavy military presence, because we have to if North Korea is communist. And also, the leaders of North Korea exhibit some instability. So there we go. So there you have it, and that's the Korean War, really sad war. A lot of American troops died, and it's kind of seen as not really a victory. It's not necessarily a defeat, but it's more of just kind of a truce, a ceasefire, like, hey, we're just going to lay down our guns. We realized that we didn't stop y'all, but hey, at least y'all didn't spread this far into South Korea. So that still exists today, the 38th parallel, and sometimes you may hear it called the DMZ, aka the demilitarized zone, where if any side crosses the border, the DMZ, a war might pop off. Crazy, wow. All right, let me get one more drink and then we'll keep going. We're almost done. We're getting to the fun stuff now. And I'm being very sarcastic with that because it's actually very scary. All right, so let's rock and roll here. Brinkmanship is another word that you need to know. It's basically just vocabulary. And what it means is that each side is going to make threats constantly and take weird actions, such as Korean War, where we kind of step on each other's toes because we want to see how the other side is going to react. We know we both got these bombs, and we're going to push it. We're going to say, hey, I'm going to use my bomb on you if you stop me from doing this, and the other side, no, you ain't. That says, no, you ain't, because I've got a bomb too, and we're just going to kill each other. So it's kind of this weird game of we're going to push y'all to the edge, and then we're going to bring it right back, okay? Because we know the other side could potentially blow us up. And it's both sides doing this. The U.S. and Soviet Union, so the U.S. will expand a little bit. The U.S. might build more bombs. The U.S. might make some big military, development. And the Soviet Union, obviously, they know about all this. Both countries are spying on each other, okay? And the Soviet Union, they'll do the same thing. They'll take over a territory. They might test an atomic bomb. And so it's called brinkmanship, pushing each other to the edge, but never following through, because here's why. It's going to end in nuclear war and death for the whole society, basically the whole world, all right? And neither side was really willing to do that, okay? Because it basically meant nuclear war, it's going to be bad if it ever happens. I'm going to tell you why down here, okay? So people come up with this another vocabulary word that you need to know. It's called peaceful coexistence, all right? And it's basically really self-explanatory. Both sides decide just to coexist. They say, hey, y'all are there, we're here. We don't really want this. We think we do, but we don't, all right? And so they decide, hey, we're going to keep on doing what we're doing, but it's kind of just a peaceful coexistence. Y'all are going to be doing y'all's thing, we're going to be doing our thing. Maybe we'll step on each other's toes sometimes, but we're going to try to stay out of each other's way most of the time. And what it is, it's just basically the idea that communism can exist alongside capitalism just because we don't want to have this happen right here. All right? It's very simple. And that's called peaceful coexistence. Okay? Moving right along. All right, this is where we get to the interesting stuff. So here's why people did not want this to happen, both governments and citizens alike, and why basically everybody was paranoid the entire time of communism and things like that, because it was a scary time where you don't know It's kind of the enemy could be lurking, and behind the enemy brings a nuclear explosion, potentially, okay? And people knew what was going to happen because of Nagasaki and Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They knew some really bad things would happen if these bombs went off. So first one, what happens after the initial bomb is a firestorm. When the bomb goes off, and you should definitely YouTube some stuff about atomic weapons, like how do they work, what happens, because you're going to find some very interesting and terrifying things. So first of all, it's a firestorm. After the bomb goes off, everything catches on fire because it's literally hotter than the surface of the sun. So it spreads just a massive fire in the immediate realm. And we're talking within 2-3 miles. And here's the thing about fires, they spread, okay? Then, after that, we're going to have a lot of radiation fallout, all right? So radiation, massive amounts are released when a bomb goes off. That energy, those electrons, neutrons, all the trons that are in a bomb, I'm not a scientist, all the trons that are in an atomic bomb, they go up into the atmosphere and they're full of radiation. And that it goes up in the clouds and it falls onto the earth in the form of black rain, which is fallout. It's radiation, that really makes you sick. It basically poisons your entire body. It makes people's hair fall out. It makes people's, your body just kind of kills itself from the inside, and it's just very, very bad because it kills all your cells. Radiation kills both good and bad cells, unfortunately, okay? Then there will be, of course, in the very beginning, an electromagnetic pulse, which is a loss of electricity. So there's no power, obviously, okay? And then lastly, and I should have put these in reverse order. I made this last year. Lastly, nuclear winter. So what that means is that these big clouds are going to form from the explosion because the massive amounts of smoke and that radiation will get up in these clouds and basically turn the atmosphere to poison. Our global temperature is going to drop, and then crops don't grow, and of course the ground around it is poison, because we're talking about massive, massive bombs. If we're talking multiple nuclear weapons that release these things, it's going to poison the atmosphere in that region for a long, long time. Basically, extremely large amounts of death, all right? Now, I know that's really morbid. It's also very interesting. I think humans find this stuff really interesting. At least I do, and I know a lot of people do, because I think it's something that is just absolutely terrifying, and for some reason, people love terrifying things. I don't know. It's very interesting, and it's very scary. I really hope it never happens, all right? Now, obviously, though, you can't just get rid of your nuclear weapons. Because you look at this and you say, well, why would countries even have this? You can't get rid of your nuclear weapons. Because here's the problem. Do you trust your enemy? If you say, hey, I'm putting away my bombs, I'm dismantling them, getting rid of them, you got to do it too. Do you really trust that they're going to do that? Absolutely not. And you're not going to get rid of your bombs, okay? So the reason why they exist during this is because you can't get rid of them at this point. You say, hey, why did we even create this? Well, first of all, we didn't really know. We didn't know exactly how bad it would be. That's the problem when you unleash the power like that. But now you're stuck in this situation where you can't get rid of it. Okay. So why does peace exist? Why is it a Cold War and not a hot war? See what we do there? It's a Cold War because there's not much actual fighting. Okay. It's a Cold War because both sides know it's not going to end well for either side. Okay? It's going to be bad. It's going to be real bad. So that actually kind of works in our favor because now we know, hey, we really don't want this for everybody because it's going to be really bad. So they say, hey, we hate you, but we're not going to blow each other up. That's what the Cold War is. All right? Let's keep rocking and rolling. So both sides, however, conduct atomic tests. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, they're trying to learn more about the bomb and how it works, and they're wanting to make bigger and better ones. And second of all, it's a way to flex on your enemy. When you detonate a big bomb and they're like, holy crap, they've got a bomb that big, that's going to do a weird intimidation thing. You're showing off to your enemy, hey, look what we got, look what we can do. Crazy, okay? So it's just this weird flex the entire time. Now, the U.S., they tested our nuclear weapons on remote Pacific islands, and there are stories about people on those remote Pacific islands. They did evacuate the citizens, but, some people just didn't leave, and some people weren't allowed to leave, and, maybe they didn't give them fair warning. And a lot of people on those Pacific islands got sick. I can't remember the exact names right now because I'm thinking of this one, Kyrgyzstan. I know a lot about this one. It's a little bit, not more interesting because they're both really, really sad. But the thing is, nowadays, these areas that were populated in Kyrgyzstan, which is it was a state of the Soviet Union at the time, people are continuing to die from radiation poisoning because of the numbers of bombs that the Soviet Union detonated. The Soviet Union really went after it with their tests, and they didn't even tell these people about it. They would just drop a bomb. They'd say, hey, Russia's a massive country, and the Soviet Union was a massive empire. And people knew, they said, hey, there's probably not anybody living down there, or if it is, it's very few. So they'd go drop bombs on these different areas of their empire, which is horrible. And, it's another way, it's a form of totalitarian, that genocidal type thing that Stalin was into, where he's like, I don't like them all. I don't like all these people. Remember, Stalin and his people killed about 20 million people. So this is, just that mentality of that government would continue to think like that. And so they're okay with dropping bombs on their own people. Super wild. All right. So at home, a few different things happen as a result of this. First of all, we created some things called civil defense programs. And basically what it is, it's like a group of people in a community, and they get together and they say, hey, what is our plan in case this nuclear thing does pop off? All right. So basically, it's like a little training thing that they got together as a group of people in the community, like a city council type situation, but a lot more people. And they basically plan and prepare, store away water, store away things like that to prepare for a nuclear attack, okay? Because they knew very few of them would survive. They really didn't put too much planning into it, all right? So these things were definitely way underdeveloped, and because they knew, like, hey, things are going to be pretty bad. So people had really this ironic sense of, like, oh, this is going to be a terrible thing, but we better plan just in case. Now, people did create fallout shelters, which I know still exist, and actually there's one in Murfreesboro right behind the public library. So now you know, if you ever have a nuclear issue around here, their fallout shelter is behind the old public library. All right, I hope it's still open. I saw the sign for it a couple weeks ago. So a fallout shelter, what they are is basically an underground structure, like a basement, that are well supplied. They're lined with concrete, so they're not going to blow up. And the idea, it's basically, and I think everybody pretty much is familiar with a fallout shelter, it's a place to go when the nuclear bomb does happen, okay? So they're basically like basements. They're stocked with military supplies, but here's the thing, they were hard to get, and they're mainly only built for government and the high-ranking military officials. You could also buy one as a consumer yourself, but they were very expensive. But remember, the government, their job was to take care of its leaders and their high-ranking military officers, so they really didn't construct all that many as far as in a public setting, okay? All right, now, then we get to the space race. And we're going to talk a whole lot more about the space race when we get to the 1960s. But it starts during the Cold War, because you got to think, if you can go to space, you definitely have control of basically the whole world, because you can access anywhere in the world from space pretty quick. It's going to use a lot of money and a lot of fuel, but you can still get there pretty quick. And if you can land on the moon, you could probably shoot nukes at somebody from the moon if you think about it. So, or at least that was the way of thinking. I don't think you actually could. It'd probably burn up in the atmosphere. That would be really bad. So anyways, the space race begins. Both sides are racing to access space, to land on the moon, all that stuff that we know about, okay? And the first satellite that you need to know is actually launched by the Soviets. They actually have the first victory in the battle for space. And it's called Sputnik, is what the satellite was called. And the USA freaked out, because they did not think the Soviet Union did not, they were like, surely they can't have this much technology like we've got. We won World War II, we've got all this money. They're kind of struggling after World War II for a little bit. And they don't expect the Soviet Union to do this, but they launched the satellite Sputnik, and America kind of lost its mind for a minute. Because think about this, their enemy has launched a satellite into space now. Oh man, they're winning a little bit here. So this causes massive fear and anxiety. NASA is created, which is awesome that this happens as a result, because I think NASA is a really cool thing now. But NASA was created in response to this, and the space race really kicks into gear. All right, and we're going to talk a whole lot more about the space race. We're putting it on hold until we get to John F. Kennedy, because he talks about putting a man on the moon and stuff. So we'll get more into that later. All right, now. So another vocabulary word that you need to know is called mutually assured destruction, aka MAD. And what it means is that they mutually know, meaning they have a shared knowledge that if this happens, nuclear war happens, it's going to destroy everything. So it's a shared, sure knowledge that both sides are going to destroy each other. So that way you don't take action. Okay? All right, we got one more topic. I need one more sip of water, and we'll be good to go. This is our last thing. Let's see how we're doing on this video. Oof, going a little long. I'm sorry about that, but the Cold War is a huge topic. All right? So let's do this, and we'll get rock and rolling. Okie dokie. So, Cuba, nearby the U.S. Remember, we've already dealt with Cuba with the Spanish-American War. Weird kind of relationship with them because, you know, America, empire building, all this stuff. So, Cuba. Cuba is under political influences of the Soviet Union. All right. The Soviet Union knew that Cuba was nearby, and they said, look, if we ever have to launch a nuclear weapon at the United States, Cuba would be a great spot to do it from. It's only 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So they're going to start trying to turn Cuba into a communist country. And there's a leader, his name is Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro. You remember him. And Fidel Castro, he's a fan of communism. He's a fan of the Soviet Union. He saw his people very poor all of his life, and he says, look, the people need to have some power, and the best way to do it is to get rid of poverty, get rid of rich people, get rid of poor people, and let's have a communist revolution, okay? So Fidel Castro tries to start taking over and making Cuba a communist country, and he pretty much succeeds, by the way, because he has help from the Soviet Union. So Castro takes over Cuba, and he started being under the influence of communism because the U.S. had cut off their trade because of this. The U.S. says, hey, y'all are starting to look like communists. We don't like this. We're cutting off trade with you. That's what the U.S. does. They cut off money when they don't like what you're doing. Okay? So the the Soviet Union steps in as their main trading partner, and the U.S. is like, man, oh man, we got to do something right here. So the U.S. does something pretty unusual and pretty wild. They overthrew Castro's government. They sent in spies and the CIA to train Cuban citizens to overthrow the government, and the CIA themselves are going to launch something called the Bay of Pigs invasion. So the Bay of Pigs, it's a bay in Cuba, and it's just a name for it. And the U.S. lands there with their forces, CIA forces, and they plan to meet up with the Cuban forces on the ground, and what they're going to do is overthrow Castro's government. But guess what happens? The Bay of Pigs, for the U.S., fails. The invasion falls apart. They were not prepared for the strength of Castro's army, and he fought them off. Castro becomes a national hero, and now the U.S. looks really bad to most of the world because we invaded this place with the intention to overthrow their government. So that looks pretty imperial, think about that. And we failed. And so it's a big embarrassment for our military and our government, and it shows the world like, hey, we're kind of up to no good either if we're going into different places just because of who their friends are, all right? And not only that, everybody's like, look, y'all, if we start something with them, who's friends with them, we're going to have major issues, aka nuclear war. So Bay of Pigs, big problem. Also almost got the whole world blown up with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happens just a year later, 1962, okay? Good grief. In the early 60s, the U.S. placed nuclear missiles in Turkey aimed at the Soviet Union. So remember that the U.S. is planting weapons all over Europe at this point, okay? And is that really fair? Technically, no, okay? But now, Soviet Union, remember with Cuba, they say, hey, we're going to do the same thing, okay? So now both sides know that they've got weapons pointed at each other. Now, after this Bay of Pigs thing, the Soviet Union really steps in and starts putting more weapons because Castro's like, look, we need defense, all right? Now, in October of 1962, the U.S. discovered nuclear missiles in Europe. We were spying on them. We sent over spy planes and took pictures of them, and we saw them, and they were like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. Okay? So the US sets up a naval blockade, which is technically kind of an act of war. And then for 2 weeks in late October 1962, as these two countries looked at each other saying, hey, do we really want this war? They start to set up negotiations. But so it's really tense, it's covered in the news, but it helped to reduce tension afterwards, okay? I'm sorry I kind of just read that. Had to kind of jog my own memory on that one. So it's a lot of steps, crucial, complex process, and very, very tense time period. Woo! I'm really tired after all that. Cold War, crazy time. Remember, a lot of major, just a very stressful time where they're wondering, is the other side going to blow us up with nuclear weapons? Crazy, crazy, crazy. All right, that was really fast. I tried to keep it under an hour. Hopefully I made it. 45 minutes. I'm at 44:50, so I'm going to go ahead and call it good. Guys, that was the Cold War in a nutshell. Please go back and rewatch this. I'm going to post these notes online along with a reading that you can access. And the questions will be really simple this week because I want y'all to work really hard on if you have missing assignments, okay? Guys, hope everybody's doing well. Please email me if you need anything at all. And have a great day. Bye.